Hey everyone, how's it going? Today I'm going to be painting up one of my favorite Space Marine chapters, the Retributors. I was a huge fan of the scheme when the Astartes animation came out, and my own Space Marine army was painted like this for a time, so without more delay, let's get into it. So here we have our model. I used a helmet from the Stern Guard Veterans that came with a Leviathan box, and I 3D printed a Retributor shoulder pad. And now we're going to start off with priming the model black. After that is good and dry, let's move on to basing the armor. For this whole process, I'm going to be using various grays, mixing them together in each subsequent step and sponging it on with a makeup wedge piece to create some volumetric lighting. Our first gray is going to be Pro Acryl's dark neutral gray. Remember to thin down your paints and do this in 2 thin coats so we can better control the paint. It prevents obscuring details and helps achieve a cleaner, smoother finish. Next, I'm going to make a 50-50 mix of our dark neutral gray and Citadel's Mechanicus standard gray, thinning it down a little bit with some water, then sponging it onto the model but concentrating on applying this on the more exposed portions of the armor. Imagine you have a flashlight shining down on top of the model. The brighter lit areas will be our brighter grays and the darker shadow areas will be our dark gray. So we're attempting to create those natural gradients with our various grays here. After that is dry, I'm going to be using just Mechanicus Gray, thinning it down, and continuing our sponging to create a gradient. For our armor elements, I'm going to be painting white. I'm going to brush on the Mechanicus Gray so we build up to our white. Next is taking a 50-50 mix of Mechanicus Gray and Dawnstone and continuing the sponging journey. With each brighter gray I'm focusing more on the upper or raised portions of the armor, leaving the darker grays in the areas where light wouldn't be shining. Next paint on the list is just going to be Dawnstone. Our final gray that we're going to be sponging on is going to be a 50-50 mix of Dawnstone and Pro Acryl's bright neutral gray. Now I'm going to move on to using bright neutral gray from Pro Acryl and basing the helmet, shoulder pad, and knee pad. I'm also going to be using this to create some limited edge highlights on the sharper edges of the armor. It may seem really bright compared to the rest of what we've done, but when we apply our streaking grime wash, it's going to knock down the tone of everything a little bit. Let's move on to the white. I'm using bold titanium white to stipple it on the helmet and shoulder pad and knee pad to create a gradient, and follow it up with some edge highlights to bring out some more detail. For the sections between the armor, the islands, and the pistol, I'm just going to be using Vallejo model color black. Using Rhinox hide, I'm going to block in our leather pouches and holster, as well as a tiny bit of handle on the knife that is exposed. For the Aquila emblem on the helmet and the Retributors emblem, I'm going to paint these with Sycorax bronze. For our other metallic elements, I'm going to base these with Citadel's Iron Warriors. Let's add some edge highlights to our pistol here, and for that I'm going to go back to our Mechanicus Gray. Once we have all that done, I'm going to apply some transfers to our model. The reason I don't show or really teach this is I feel like I don't do a super duper good job of doing it. So if you are looking for guidance with transfers, I recommend heading over to Brushstroke Painting Guide. He does a really good job of providing a tutorial for decal applications. After those are applied, I'm going to break out some matte varnish and apply this just to our armor and our decals to seal them in. Once that is dry, I'm going to go back to our bold titanium white and I'm going to create some scratches into our decals for some additional weathering. Continuing with some weathering, I'm going to go back to our Rhinox hide and create some chips in the armor using a piece of makeup wedge. Next we're going to go to the Holy Winter Streak and Grime Wash. I like to use a rough 50-50 mix with the grime and mineral spirits and apply this with a cheap brush. Once you have the whole model good and covered, I'm going to not wait and get a lightly dampened Q-tip to start gently working off the grime. This reduction method can take some getting used to, but once you do it a few times, you really do get a good feel for gauging how much you need to take off to get the finish that you want. Now you can either let it air dry, or to speed up the process, I just take a hair dryer and I blast it nice and good. Next, let's create some streaks in some of the chips of the armor, and for this I'm going to use our streaking grime, placing just a small dart where a chip is, and I'm going to let it dry for about 10 to 15 minutes, or you can hair dry it as well. And once it's dry, I'm going to take a small brush, I'm going to lightly dampen it with some mineral spirits, I'm going to lightly work the brush vertically to create those streak effects. Continuing on, I'm going to move on to our black wash, and I'm going to be using this as a recess wash to help bring out more detail on our model. What I'm also going to do is apply this to our knife blade to darken the metal on it, so when we apply some highlights to our knife, it's going to have more contrast between the deep gunmetal and the light scratches and highlights. And for our metal highlights, I'm going to be using Warpaint Fanatic Mithril. Moving on to the leather, I wanted a nice warm tone, so I'm using Mornfane Brown from Citadel. What I usually do for leather is work with thinning down the paint a little more than usual, getting the excess off the brush so we can retain control, and working in multiple layers to create scratches and highlights near the edges of the holster and pouches. The same process is going to be used for our last highlight using Scrag Brown, but being more conservative with its application. Our last step is going to be applying some dirt to his boots and lower shins to blend him into the mud base I'm going to be putting him on. I'm using some AK interactive dirt effects and thinning it down a little bit and applying it in layers to get the look that I'm going for. And that is it. Thank you everyone for stopping by and checking out the video. Even if you didn't learn anything, I hope this at least motivates you to paint your models or to try something different. Have a happy new year everyone, and I'll see you next time.